Hello and welcome to the first Identity Architects of 2023. By now, hopefully you all know that the purpose of this podcast is to spotlight pioneers in our industry who are changing the way that data is used to drive more engaging data-driven experiences. I'm your host Ben Cicchetti, and for this episode, our SVP of Sales for Europe, Stu Colman, sat down with Mayze, Global Head of Data and AI at WPP, to discuss data transformation, privacy, collaboration, and much, much more. Before I hand it over to Stu and Di, just a reminder to hit that subscribe button so you know when the next episode of Identity Architects lands. But without any further delay, here's Stu's conversation with Di.
Today I am very pleased to be joined by Mayze, who, I'm just looking at my notes here, is the Global Head of Data and AI. So I'm sure we're going to get into questions about data and maybe robots, at WPP I should say. Di, welcome.
Hey Stu, thanks for having me.
Good. Do you want to start with just giving people just a quick intro to yourself? I know you well, we've known each other for about 4 years or so since I started at InfoSum. But lovely for you to just kind of give an overview to the world of who you are, what you do, a little bit of your history would be fantastic.
Yeah, hi. So I'm, as you said, Global Head of Data and AI for WPP. The first thing I always say when I describe my role, I'm not a data scientist, but I absolutely love data and the opportunity it can bring to build a fairer and more inclusive society. So I'm all about bringing data to life, giving our fantastic data talent globally a platform to share their work, to make sure we have a focus on insights rather than data, have some fun with the storytelling. I started my data career in dunnhumby in 2006, and they've just such a brilliant culture. So it taught me that data can be fun. And if you create an environment where you unleash people's inner nerd, then you can really do some brilliant things with data. So I've been in this role since 2019 and just love it.
Brilliant. And you are one of the most passionate and engaging people I've met in the data space. So looking forward to kind of hearing that passion today and kind of learning a bit more about you and your history and also getting a bit kind of into the depths of your brain and some of your insights and some of your knowledge about the use of data, the role of data, and some of the stuff you've been talking about there about data is way more than just ones and noughts. It's actually got a life. It's got something that we can work with and play with. Format, as always with these Identity Architects podcasts, is we'll do a few quick fire questions. I'm going to try and keep you to about a minute per question or minute per answer. That's all right. So we've got kind of 7 or 8 of those where just a few things to give us a bit of insight about you. And then we're going to dive deep into some of the kind of more meaty questions around the role of data, the importance of data, the use of data, some of the stuff that really is bread and butter for you. But I'm sure the listeners will be really engaged with what you have to say and the thoughts you have to share. So again, thank you for coming. Let's start with, what's your earliest memory of advertising?
Oh, this totally brings me back to being a school kid, getting home from school, being stuck in front of the telly with some Nesquik spread sandwich. How revolting is that?
Oh, I remember biscuit. Sandwich spread.
So it would be something around at the time, like Milky Bars Are On Me. It would be something that I can sing along to, where I realised that actually ads could be entertaining and actually a bit of a break from the programming. And I've always loved ads for that.
Yeah, TV advertising was brilliant, wasn't it? The lip adverts for BA. Not sure we're allowed to talk about smoking adverts, but the Hamlet adverts were genius.
No, don't talk about them. Join the club.
Blend. Yeah.
Oh, yes, that romance.
Just brilliant days. And that obviously gave you I'm sure like many of us, a passion for advertising and the space. So you obviously moved into advertising as a career. What was your first job in kind of advertising or marketing? Tell us a little bit about that.
It was kind of both, actually. I did a business studies degree that had 2 sets of 6 months in industry, and I found the course actually really very dull, even though I've always been fascinated in business and the decisions and the culture. I thought it was really dull, but there was a subject called buyer behavior that totally made me realise how I might have been influenced, subconsciously, that I didn't know about. So I did a work placement at Auto Trader where. So I'm really old. This is 1996. I wrote the metadata for the car ads for the first Auto Trader website. and then joined Hearst UK, which is a glossy magazine publisher, and was their first online manager in 1999.
So right at the start, you're in there with data.
Yeah, I just loved it. I didn't know I did. And then I thought I was a misfit, but actually I found my groove now, and I'm not a misfit in this role, but I was for much of my career.
Brilliant. And you've had a stellar career since, and hopefully we'll learn a bit more about that as we go through. But knowing what you know now and the things that you've learned and the experiences that you've had, looking back to that time and that young guy starting at Auto Trader and writing those ads, what would you say to yourself now in terms of the things to look forward to and the things that perhaps you would do differently or embrace more as you've gone through your career?
I would tell younger Di that you're nerdy, just it's okay, just unleash it. But at the time, I just thought I was a misfit, particularly in glossy magazines, and I was told I wasn't glamorous or memorable. And actually, people do remember me talking about data. But I guess in the magazine world, where that's not what you want to listen to people talk about. So I was a misfit there. But actually, and the inclusivity of a data career, because there's something for everyone, whether you love getting in and doing the data science, or you love the storytelling, or you want to champion the people. There's something for everyone. So that's what I say.
Yeah, absolutely. And clearly you do have a passion. We talked about that right at the start. But what is it about your job and the career that you have right now that you really love? What is it about it that kind of makes you so excited?
I'll never be done. There's always new talent, there's people moving, there's new skills. By the time I feel like I've swatted up on everything I need to know about a certain tech, it's updated or someone's done something new with it. And I keep forgetting all the stats principles, so then I have to remind myself. And just from an intellectual greediness, you'll just never know everything. And I just love that.
It's that blend of, I guess, of advertising never really stops. There's always innovation and growth in advertising. Data is on this massive trajectory of evolution and development, and that's fantastic. And the technology that underpins it, I can't remember the principle about computer kind of repeating itself every 2 years or whatever it is, but things like ChatGPT these days is the big thing. But things like that just mean that it never stops. There's always something new to learn and something to do, isn't there?
And I think it's a really good intellectual discipline to not be scared. I see my parents being scared of tech, and they assume something's wrong with them, and they've done it wrong. And I think with data and the tech, if you just accept that you won't know it and it's a journey and you're okay with that, then it can just be really fulfilling.
Absolutely. And I think the storytelling bit, we'll get into that bit, I think, later. I think the storytelling bit is a really key bit of data. I mean, it's often overlooked. It's often the bit that isn't perhaps as understood or appreciated. People think of the nerds and the techie bit, and they think of the advertising at the end. But no, it's the glue that keeps it together.
Beauty is. I mean, that's where everybody can get involved and celebrate small data and slow data. It doesn't all have to be big and complex and complicated. Some of the favorite stories at WPP are using one, maybe two data sets, and brilliant creative work done on restaurant reviews to sell a type of ketchup, for example. That's not a complicated.
No, it is quite, or can be quite, a daunting subject though. So if you were asked to explain what you do, or the role of identity, or term identity, I guess, which is kind of sits at the heart of data in a modern world, if you were to explain that to a 10-year-old and kind of get them to understand what you do, or what we do, I guess, how would you go about that?
It's a really good one to deconstruct identity on. I'd say to a 10-year-old, it's what makes you human, because the default is name or mobile number, but actually it's what do you choose to do with your time, particularly online, which leaves quite a footprint. So if you made a photo of yourself and made it into pixels, all those different pixels are different parts of you that tell a story of who you are. And if you look at those, we've done it before in presentations where we've done a blurry Mona Lisa, and it's like, this is somebody who we don't know, and then you move forward. And I used an example before to actually explain to my son on buy a present for someone you've never met before versus buy a present for your best mate. And if you deconstruct how much easier it is to buy for your best mate versus a present for someone you've never met before, it's those things that make them who they are as an individual.
Yeah, it's a really good understanding, I guess, or explanation. I guess we often default to identity as being a person, being a named thing like an email address or phone number. But you're right, it's our presence in the world, it's our footprint on the world, it's the things we do, it's the things we interact with and engage with that make us who we are, without necessarily knowing specifically who I am. I guess that's it's a good way of looking at it, and I guess a 10-year-old will be able to understand that.
I'd want my email and my name to be the least interesting parts of my
Yeah.
identity. I didn't actually pick my name.
There are some interesting emails out there as well, but yeah.
That's so
Okay.
true.
And obviously, data is a big subject, and we're going to jump into some detail in a minute. But when you think about your role and you think about the job that you have to do, and you think about the things you're trying to achieve, what kind of keeps you up at night? What kind of keeps you thinking? And worrying is perhaps the wrong word, but what are you aware of, and what things would you like to perhaps try and solve or help you sleep at night?
I'm really conscious about the unintended consequences of data, and then how that feeds in to AI, and then what we eventually will be asking the machines to do. And no one, well, let's say not no one, but most people don't mean any harm,
Yeah.
whether you're accidentally or unintentionally offering different prices to different ethnicities or genders, or whether you're excluding groups. The digital divide is real
Yep.
and could be helped by data, but possibly is being made worse. I think the KPIs that we have to set, it's got to be more efficient and it's got to be more cost effective, and you've got to do more with less, is potentially creating bubbles in society. And that worries me. And it's never the data that's the evil person, it's the bad actor, but I
Yeah.
worry about that.
It's an interesting debate around bad actor and all that stuff. And you use the phrase at the start, the unintentional consequences. And whose responsibility do we think that is to kind of prevent that? Is it ours? Is it the technology? Where does that kind of responsibility sit?
And I think it has to go back to a human. So wherever that human is,
Yep.
I do think it would be helpful if, as a culture in the world, we moved away from cancel immediately and more into forgiveness
Mm-hmm.
and learning. Because I think that doesn't help. That, oh no, I've made a mistake of accidentally, unintentionally charged somebody more for this, which I shouldn't have done, or targeted someone differently, and actually that doesn't reflect very well on my brand. And I think
Yep.
that fear of being cancelled and the lack of forgiveness. And I think if we as society, we all try and move on, accept there's mistakes, and where there's mistakes, there's great learnings. And if people learn and companies learn from that, then we can move forward and make sure we do keep progressing.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, and I guess there's a debate. We won't get into it now because we've only got a short amount of time to talk to each other. But I'd love to talk to you at some point. I mean, is the answer to that more data or less data, or is it better data or cleaner data? Or there's so many kind of approaches to how you try and control or manage those kind of concerns, I guess. But the always comes back to a human. I think is definitely an interesting debate.
And
With
what
the
are you
rise of
rewarding your teams to do? I mean, if you think
yeah,
about the KPIs or the OKRs or the objectives or the goals or whatever language you use as a company, if you're just pushing for efficiencies and revenue all the
yeah,
time, there will be unintentional harm to
yeah.
people in society.
Let's not go down that rabbit hole because we'll be here forever. Let's come back to the quickfire questions. I've got two more for you.
Okay.
So, what motivates you in the morning? What makes you want to get up and get to work and do the things that you do?
Oh, so much. Talking to our data teams in our agencies, just what they're working on, working with clients. I love being dropped into a client and getting to know the people and clients on what's your data, what are you doing with it, just learning more about what people are doing with data, what they need, what they don't. Love hearing about quirky things done with new data sets. That makes me so happy when I think about people doing creative things with data.
Brilliant. And there's plenty of data out there at the moment that I think is quite interesting and innovative. So I think if that's what motivates you, you've certainly got a lot of enjoyment to come.
And I want to catch up with you and think we should do a whole nother podcast on data that's got value that people aren't extracting as much as they should out of it.
I'll happily talk to you about that. Great. Last question on the quickfire, and then we'll dive into a bit more kind of detail. So, my favourite question: if there was a song that was the soundtrack of your life, what would it be?
Oh, it's got to be Queen, Don't Stop Me Now.
Great song.
Oh, that's got to be.
But yeah,
That's got to be my song.
That's a good soundtrack. Live by that motto.
Oh yes.
Brilliant. Right. So let's dive in a bit more. So your experience, your talents. I said you're very passionate. You're one of the most knowledgeable people I know around this space, particularly in kind of, as you put, that kind of storytelling element, that taking the data, understanding it, kind of a raw level, but transposing it or turning it into a way of thinking, a way of approaching data that is accessible and addressable. And I think that's it's probably a fairly rare trait, and I think it's a very valuable trait right now. So I hope we get to kind of dive into a bit of that. But I think everybody would agree that data in some way, shape or form has always been an important part of every company's success. And data's fed so many things, but you've got to treat it right. You've got to use it in the right ways. And sometimes companies get that right. Sometimes they get it wrong. But in general, what's your kind of take on the role that data plays within companies, and particularly around their strategies, and potentially how's that kind of evolved in the last few years in kind of the engagements that you've had?
Oh, that's a brilliant question. So firstly, I'd say there is a direct correlation between data use and data maturity in a company and its market capitalization. So I think we know that if you get it right culturally and with skills and get the right data in the hands of the right people, that your business will grow and you'll be building a sustainable business. So I start to unpack it when I'm talking to clients, because I go, let's just make some decisions about data. And we did a similar process at WPP. Do you want to own all the data, or do you want to focus on access? We talk about connect, not collect at WPP. Data, yep. It's wrong to say it's an asset. It's not an asset. It's a big cost and a liability, unless you build everything else around it. So how much to collect, how much to buy, what is valuable? I often suggest to clients that they consider, if it were to be implemented, that there would be an externality tax for hosting and storing data, which was discussed in New York in the last years. Like, imagine paying tax on it, then that might make you think a bit more about what you're collecting and what's valuable, rather than this safety net of I'll just have everything and I'll create a target that's I'm going to have 2 billion rows of data and I'm going to get all of this identity. So I think if you think about, if I can get people to think about, what do you need to know about your consumers? What does your best consumer look like? What's your definition of best? And then how much do you want to collaborate? Culturally, you're going to collaborate with others, which is what I love. InfoSum and where we came in, it's about collaboration, and people can make conscious decisions of, I want to share my data with that company, and we'll get a reciprocity, clear value exchange with consumers. So I think people unpack the decisions of what they actually want the role of data to be, because you can outsource it all and third party it all and go for very low risk. Yep. Or you could go, actually, I want all my consumers who interact with me as a brand every month to know what we do with the data, and I'm going to go for a transparency. And actually, we can't assume that individuals don't want to share their data, because we know they do, and they want to be recognized. I love it when a brand recognizes me as a loyal consumer. So we don't want to go too far of, not collect, and I hear first party data's dead and third party data is dead and it's all zero party data, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe geez. All of those things, but actually what's the role of data in that business is they need to know their consumers and they need to know where they could be more efficient, and they've got decisions to make around that.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And just as a kind of adjacent to that, I think we've always been challenged as an industry in getting the correlation between knowledge about a user and the value that they get as a result of us having that knowledge. And I think that's led to perhaps some of those views of I don't want you to have my data because it's big and scary and what you're going to do with it. And actually, often the outputs are really positive for people and the opportunities it creates will be really positive. And for companies, it's a great thing to be able to work with that data. So
I mean, you're so right. When I worked at dunnhumby, so, Tesco Club Card, customers of Tesco would call if their mailer was late because it was so clear what a loyal customer was, and it wasn't just about how much you spent, but if you did your main shop at Tesco, whether you were a single person or had 25 people living in your house, you would get the best price, and that was a clear value exchange, and you would share your shopping data and you'd get great relevant offers back.
Yep.
And for people to call and say, "Where's my mailer?" I think it just blew my mind. But I haven't seen anyone get that value exchange and the reciprocity and the trust and the transparency so spot on that you call and go, "Where's my part of the reward for the data?"
We don't get people phoning us up anymore or asking those questions. But I do wonder, just on kind of continuing that theme, I do wonder whether the rise of more first-party data, the rise of technologies like clean rooms that make that data more accessible in a much safer way, maybe there is a chance now to start that kind of twofold approach of saying the technology to underpin the security and the privacy and the safety of that data now exists in a much better way than it used to, number one. But number two, our ability to work with it is much greater. We can partner with more people. We can create more understanding. So the value we can give you, the things that we can do to make our messaging to you and our value and our offers, etc., to you better, maybe we get to start to kind of balance the privacy and the performance a bit more.
I'd
like
totally
to think
agree.
So.
I mean, you should. And I think we celebrate that third-party cookies are going to go at some point because the word tracking is horrible. It's 2023. We track people that they don't know that they're being followed, and just treating people online and in other parts of the marketing ecosystem as if it was real life. You wouldn't follow someone around a shopping centre. And from the individual's point of view, I maybe would be more conscious of data if I realised at that point I'm on the sofa searching for stuff that's being collected and what that might play back. So yeah, I think you're right. I think and it should be celebrated and enhanced that this is what data is about me as around, and this is who's commercializing it and monetizing it, and maybe I have more say in who gets to monetize it, and maybe I use it as a slightly negative. Actually, you brand, I don't like you. You don't get to have it, but you brand, I like you, so you can have my data. But maybe I should have more autonomy of who gets that.
Yeah, I think that would be a good thing broadly, and I think maybe we're on a journey towards that space. I think there's a long way to go, but I think maybe we're on that journey, and I think that comes from the points you were making earlier about you don't necessarily need loads of data. It's not just about how much you collect. It's about the quality and the depth and the understanding that you get from it. That's as valuable as collect 2 million records. Well, what if those 2 million records are rubbish?
I mean, totally. And I always suggest to clients they look at their call center data, because that's going to give them a really good. If we stop talking about data and look at signals, have a look about what people are saying about you on Twitter, if that's still a thing. Have a look at when people call you and what they're saying to you, because your consumers are giving you signals. What markets are you growing in? When are you not growing? Where have you had a big competitor launch? Everybody, whether they think they've got data or not, has that data as a business, because it's fundamentally how they run their business. And if they thought differently about the supply chain data, about what markets are growing, where they've got positive sentiment, all of that is very accessible data.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we roll kind of all that up, I guess a term that's been used probably to death is the term big data, but I guess it all rolls up into that kind of concept. Well, I was going to ask you to those not familiar with it, please explain what it is, but I think the raspberry probably explains what it is. But help us understand why you blew the raspberry and how we should think about the types of data and the world in which we now operate.
Firstly, I always tell people big data was created by companies who had big servers to sell.
There is that, yep.
Mm-hmm. And then also that a lot of data, and so I hear the stat of 90% wafted around, it's all bloody useless. So I think the concept of it needing to be big. Now, that's not to take away statistical robustness or any of the, statistical or data science practices. But we launched a creative data school in the community last year, and I used this exercise, which might explain it. I think the kids understood it. I told them to look at a supermarket receipt. And I said, tell me what information you can glean about the shopper from looking at this receipt.
Okay,
I'm
intrigued.
And then I nudged them because they'll go, oh, they bought, a bottle of Coca-Cola and some toilet roll. And I was like, well, what size was the shop? Oh, it was it was a metro or it was a local. Go, well, what does that tell you? Oh, they probably walked there. Okay. And how big a pack of toilet roll and Coca-Cola did they buy? Oh, well, it was like a 9. Oh, well, okay. If it was 9 rolls of lube, do you think that's one person who lives? So what's an assumption and what's a fact? But actually the time of day, the nature of the store, the size of the basket, how they paid, all of that information, what town they were in. I said, all of that, actually think about that just from one shopper going into one shop once, how much data is created.
Yep.
And then I get them to think about that, 65 million X, whatever. And then imagine that online. And then you're online and you're searching for something. What signals are you creating from whether you start at Google or whether you start at Amazon or other search engines and e-commerce sites are available? And all of that leaves data and that gets stored somewhere, copied multitude of times, gets sold, interrogated. So that's how I explain it. But normally I think I try and steer people to celebrate.
Small. So I guess to champion the phrase big data, maybe maybe what we're saying there is the traditional concept of big data means lots of data. In reality, what we're actually saying is big data is more deep than it is broad. It's not just about broad, it's about deep. It's about it's about the volume of knowledge I can get on an individual that helps me make more decisions about them. Even if I don't have many individuals, it's the depth of knowledge that I can get. And actually, probably the most important thing playing on the receipt thing is it's saying it's the things that I can learn. It's the connectivity of that information and what that creates for me, and how that drives thoughts, ideas, outcomes, etc. From that knowledge that I can infer or directly get. That perhaps is the concept of big data, is the bigness of the things I can do rather than the size of it itself.
All right, I'll give you that. And I mean, we talk about data variety is more important than data volume. And I think actually if you've got a big data focus of we just need to collect everything, I don't think that's the right approach. But I do think a lot of CPGs, automotives, the big industry players that they've always had traditionally a third party sat between them and the consumer. You've got car dealerships, you've got supermarkets. I can understand why they've got big goals to collect data about their consumer. I think where culturally brands and companies get it wrong is if the business case needs to be about big numbers, which I've had experienced this, it makes it really hard. Data governance cannot be put in as a return on investment to get business case. Storing data safely, employing engineers, having proper procedures, getting accessible policies and terms and conditions, all of that costs money. And if you're focusing just on a business case that's got to deliver ROI of X in however many years, the numbers just get silly and not actually the point. And if you had a strategy, we are going to collect a lot of data about our consumers because they're in a lot of markets or they're in a lot of categories and we've got loads of categories. And actually I want to know what a really good customer looks like. And I want to know their pets or their kids or what's important to them or where they're at. And I'm going to focus on relevance rather than just personal data. I think that's okay.
Yeah,
I'll give them that.
I'd agree with you there. And I think that's a nice segue into the value that can be created for companies. And you talked earlier, you said two things which stood out. One is that you love it when you're in front of customers and you're able to do that storytelling, and be part of that. And for the life of me, I can't remember the second thing that you said, which is really bad because I thought of it and then it went straight out of my brain. That's bad. No, it really was. It's bad data, but I got to focus on the first thing. But the question is, and I'll probably remember the point halfway through and come back to it. But the question is, if you're thinking about what we've talked about data in terms of the things that the transcendental things we can kind of glean from information, and the stories that we can tell, how is that transposed from your experience in being in front of customers and being that storyteller? How is that transposed into value? How do they actually turn that into something that's meaningful to them, over and above just a nice story?
I mean, I often talk about you're buying a present. How do you reward your consumers if you don't know who they are? What's important to them? My first data project at dunnhumby was doing I didn't do it, econometric modelling. But for a brand that wanted to know, should they do a buy one, get one free or a 3 for 2? And obviously there's a volume goal and difference there. But actually, would their most loyal customers who pick their brand rather than just whatever brand is on discount, which would they prefer? And I thought that was a really interesting, useful, commercial, measurable approach on how can I shift as many units as possible to the right people and not over discount just the people who just want to go for the cheapest and don't have. So it's an investment in brand saliency and brand equity as part of the strategy. And I think that purposeful data use, you can use it as part of your marketing. And I'd love to see terms and conditions become more accessible. And I've seen like Monzo do it. When you look at the terms and conditions, they're not behaving or they're not talking to you like you've got a law degree. They're saying, we collect your spend data and we give it to a receipt company, and so that we can tell you how much you spent. And it's like, oh, thanks, I can understand that. Yep. So I think making it part of the engine and the DNA of the brand of the company, I think that's really important.
Yep.
Don't know if that answers your question.
No, it doesn't. And that Monzo example, I think, speaks back to that value exchange we talked about earlier of if you can understand the value that's being created and you buy into that value, then you're very comfortable with the process. And I doubt they get very much pushback at all. But again, just using that receipt because it's become a bit of a theme of a kind of a focal point of ideas and thoughts. Often, certainly in my experience, people get a little bit obsessed with data in terms of deriving absolute outcomes. I want this to be definitive. I want this to be specific to a question, definitive answer. The data I've got will give me that answer because it's data. And I wonder whether some of the art, not necessarily the science of data, needs to kind of rise to the fore, where it's not necessarily about a definitive answer. It's about an indication. It's about a general direction. It's about an understanding of a broader kind of view of something that gives you a sense of the right things to be looking at or the right things to be doing. When you're talking to customers, are they still kind of obsessed with that absolute answer, or is there a church around using data in kind of a more broader kind of informative sense rather than an absolute sense? That's a really windy question. So I
really like it. I mean, it fits with where we're noodling at the moment, because there's the common practice of what data do you need, and then we'll go and get the data for you. And that's a kind of consultative approach. But WPP is a creative transformation company. We can think differently, and we're noodling at the moment of actually using data to generate questions, thinking about signals rather than data. So actually, if you don't have to have all the answers or all the questions, how about you look at what's going on and then see what questions that generates and see if you've got the data there. But I in my experience, if you ask teams what data they need, they don't know. They either say they've got too much and not enough resource, or they say they haven't got enough and they don't know what they need. And I say to every client, you don't have all the data you need, but you don't use all the data that you have. So maybe explore what you've got and brainstorm around what might you do with your ingredient data and how that might feed other parts of the business and not just the supply chain department, and how could CMOs and chief data officers work more closely together. I think that's a big opportunity. I don't necessarily see them as, in some instances, as aligned as they might be. And I wonder if CMOs think the chief data officers are there to mark their homework, to justify why they need less money. And actually this year I'm really going to look on how we can make sure those two teams are really aligned on the role of data for creative transformation.
Yeah, it's kind of symbiotic relationship, isn't it? And I think that has to be right across the organisation. I mean, as data becomes so much more intrinsic to, as we talked about earlier, intrinsic to the success of companies and the journey that they have to go on and the route that they take, you have to have all parts of the organisation bought into data being part of that journey. It can't just be in isolation.
You have to create a culture where people can go, this didn't work.
Yeah.
And otherwise, people start to pretend things did work, or they mask the truth. And then you culturally are in a bit stuck, because actually what you want is people to be okay that they failed. I just listened to a podcast on the founder of IKEA and his philanthropic organization. He would ask a question every meeting, what have you failed at this week?
Yep.
And it was very much about leaning towards the learning. And I think that's really important. So if people are worried about failing, or they've set KPIs that they know they're bonused against, then that's the behavior you're going to get.
Absolutely, yeah. If you reward a certain type of behaviour, don't expect to see anything else but that behaviour.
Well, that's what you're going to get. And then you need to do year on year. And if you need to show growth, we've promised 3% growth, and those KPIs are going to stay the same.
Yeah. It's I've talked a lot the last few weeks prior to Christmas about why the third-party cookie going away is good for the industry. And it talks a little bit to that kind of not necessarily rewarding bad behaviour, but certainly getting the thing you want if you don't look beyond the thing that you're looking at. It's really bad English, but I talked about third-party cookie in the sense that third-party cookie made the use of data on the internet easy.
Mm-hmm.
It was just easy. Stick a cookie on there and just track what people do, and we have to think about it. But I also think it made us lazy. And lazy is perhaps another word for kind of just what you're explaining, of saying you kind of couldn't get it wrong because nobody was really thinking laterally or differently about what data can do and the role it can play and the insights that we can glean. Because we all just were like, yeah, well, cookies easy. We'll just all accept cookies the way forward. So one of the things I'm most excited about, the kind of this evolution that we're going through in terms of the understanding, the appreciation, the use of data, is it's getting us out of those comfort zones that the third-party cookie put us in and made us challenge things like, we used to do it this way. Why did we do it that way? And how could we do it different? And what could we learn? And I think that's a really exciting part of where the industry is going.
It totally is, because it's if your consumers found out what you were doing and you've got any nerves about that, yeah, you know you're doing the wrong thing. Or if it appeared on the front page of a newspaper and you suddenly go, oh, okay, everyone else was doing it, so we thought it was fine. I mean, I think it is really good for a reset. I do recognise that with things like third-party cookies going, the measurement might be challenged, and I get that trade-off. And that's something that we need to talk to clients about and make sure they understand that what you can track, horrible word, you can measure, and what you can measure you can improve. And so maybe we need to find new ways to show effectiveness.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's it's a challenge for us, but I think it's an exciting thing ahead, or opportunity ahead, is looking at those new ways of working. I think measurement's a really great example of, we just can't do what we used to do. So that's making us rethink, it's making us reassess, it's making us understand, what do we have, what questions do we want to answer, and then how do we kind of bring those together. And I think that's it's a great time to be alive in that respect.
It is. And it's okay, that's gone, that's last year, let's start again, rather than try and find workarounds. And we're really committed to that here on. It's not a workaround for a third-party cookie. It's let's find a modern way to market. And it might be looking at an event someone's going to, or an occasion they're at, and it's where are they at the moment. It's not about whether they're a middle-aged homemaker who likes coupons. You, is that you?
Yeah, I'm pointing at me.
You're a middle-aged homemaker who likes coupons. Brilliant. There's loads of ads coming your way, Stu.
Yeah, there's the metadata on this podcast I can use to target you, exactly.
That's it.
Good. So in this kind of emerging space, and I say emerging, data's been around a long time, but the evolution, some would say perhaps the revolution of the use of data, technology plays a really important part of that. Technology has unlocked a lot of this opportunity and will continue to do so. So when you're looking at the industry, you have a really privileged position, perhaps of seeing more than most in the position you're in. You probably see a lot of technology, you see a lot of vendors. What excites you? What when you're looking at what you go, that's really cool. You can say InfoSum, that's fine. But outside of InfoSum, what makes you think that's really cool, that's really interesting, that's really exciting? I can see how that can make a difference. And also, what do you think's missing? Where's the next kind of opportunity for evolution?
I mean, I will say InfoSum because I do remember the
I
first
paid you. Yeah, I
time
paid you.
I met you and thought about some use cases of capability and discussed it with clients on first-party data enrichment, and they totally got it. And it opened up a world of collaboration that up to then would have become an absolute legal nightmare. So I do think that's one. You've talked about chat GPT. I think generative AI is a really interesting topic. I don't want to talk about it too much because everybody in the world is talking about it.
Yep.
But I do think people thinking about how to make it accessible to non-data scientists and using AI to create text and images and video, I think is interesting. I'm most interested from that in where it's going to go from IP and copyright. I think I've got a nerdy interest as much as I like the ethics of who owns the data and who decides. I think that the ownership and the rights and where that's heading and how different countries are going to make different decisions on what can be or IP can be assigned to AI and the role of AI in humans. I think that's
that's Pandora's box you're opening there.
Yeah.
Of intrigue.
But to go back to a passion of mine, we're working with a company called Flourish who do scrolly telling. And I'm really
scrolly
telling. So if you've been on any social media where you've seen that kind of bouncing bar charts that over time you can see the changes.
Yes.
Or you've been on a web page where the copy changes as you scroll down and things pop up to explain. So to bring the data to life. And we've partnered with them and we've done data challenges around getting data in to Flourish. And I'm really enjoying that because actually it's not necessarily the data scientists who are really excited about using that. It's Excel users, data literate Excel users who might do a pivot table and then put it into PowerPoint are suddenly going, oh, I can actually bring this to life a bit more. And I think that's evolving how you deliver insights to people, and anything that stops it being a data chart and makes it an insight or challenges people's assumptions, I love.
Yeah, and both those examples, those data scientists are worth their weight in gold, and long may that continue because they do amazing things. But both of those examples you've given with Chat GPT and the second one was called
Flourish.
I guess they almost democratize data science. They make the output of data science, which is the cool learnings and the kind of cool outcomes, accessible to many rather than the few. You don't need to be a data scientist to be able to achieve that. And I think that's, for me, that's a really key part of the future of data, is making it as accessible as possible.
I totally agree. And it's not to put data scientists out of work, but can we treat data scientists with the respect that they deserve? Let's take away the grunt work and the stupid requests and I had it in teams before where they get asked something and some poor data scientist spends months and then the business user's forgotten they've asked and it's all moved on. And I think, to actually celebrate data scientists and really articulate the different roles in the data ecosystem, and to celebrate their experience, their knowledge, and to use them properly, and to let other people play. They may actually make people better business partners to the scientists and ask properly of what data they need and what they're looking to do with it.
Yeah, absolutely. More accessible audience, and use the skills and the specialist skills in the specialist areas, not on, as you say, not on the, can you just left remove this from my Excel template, please?
Oh,
Anyway.
yeah.
And you've talked a lot about WPP, and your role there is obviously, it's a great role, and I imagine hugely exciting. But WPP as an organisation, what role do organisations like WPP play in this space? How can they help drive the narrative forward? And how can they help create the evolution that we want to be part of?
I guess there's two parts here. So firstly, WPP's vision is to create better futures for our people, our planet, our clients, and our communities.
Yep.
So the role of data and AI in that can be immense, be it training, and we've done demystify AI programs to improve data literacy within the organization, and I spoke earlier about Creative Data School that's improving data and AI literacy in schools or to less advantaged communities. So I think there's a massive role. And then for the planet, as a company that employs 109,000 people and operates in pretty much every market, we have an influence. We have, we buy a lot of data, we use a lot of data, we have a lot of people. So I think the scale mixed with our vision, I think we have a big role to play. And then the special WPP lens is, as a creative transformation company, I think if anyone has a right to play in thinking differently about data, and thinking more creatively about how to use, how to access, how to storytell, how to activate data, then I love that about this company, because we do. And that, I think I say to the data and AI community, there's no ceiling for creatively using data. You can take weather data. I've worked in retail, but weather gets the blame for everything. If we gave you all weather data, you could all do something differently with it.
It's back to that receipt again, is what does it tell you that isn't obvious? Yeah, and that's that ability and willingness to embrace that creativity, and that has to come from the top, and it has to be part of your DNA. So to have a company that embraces that at its core, I think I can see why that's exciting. I can see why you like what you do.
Thanks. We've got amazing case studies. We've just done a data annual. It's the second one. We've gathered all the quirky case studies of how agencies have. I've talked about the ketchup one. I love that from Ogilvy. We've got Wonderman Thompson used it to describe. You could describe paint colours, and it would tell you which paint from Sherwin-Williams could be described as, lost at sea or whatever. I mean, there's like really brilliant, and it's old, but it's my favourite of the British Airways. You spoke about it earlier, but it's a campaign where there was a kid on a billboard, and when the plane went over, the kid appeared on the billboard and said what the plane was going to and from. And I was like, that's a really easy data set that you've taken operational data and done something magical with it. It wasn't a WPP campaign. I've got an Aura ring that tracks sleep, and they did a campaign on the night of the US election saying how much less sleep people had. I love those. We're just thinking about how you can bring to life an interesting data set.
Yeah, and to roll it right back to where we started with kind of consumer perception, the better the execution of the campaign, the better the creativity around it, the more people understand and appreciate the value that their data creates, and the more willing they are to work in that way, I guess. So it's a self-fulfilling kind of prophecy, or a virtuous circle.
Yeah, absolutely. It should be. We picked up a signal from here, and then we implemented this, and there's something there about building trust and listening. One of my favorite is an 8-year-old boy wrote into Betty Crocker, the pre-made cake bakes, and said, why is all your campaigns for women? Boys like to cook too, and they made a change, and that you don't need a lot of data for that, but culturally everybody rallied round and they changed the labeling of the food in the UAE, and they open sourced it, and they made that signal part of a refresh of the brand, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah, definitely. One more question, and then actually two more questions. So one more question around kind of you, your job, etc., and then just a final question on who you think we should interview next. But I'm going to ask you to get your crystal ball out, and I'm going to ask you to say, look for the next kind of 5 to 10 years, that kind of time frame. What's your kind of predictions around data science, data collaboration, the use of data, big data? We're allowed to say big data anymore. What do you think we'll be looking at and talking about in kind of next 5 to 10 years?
So I think all jobs will involve data in some guise. So I think at some point there'll be an evolution where you don't mention data, just like we don't always talk about digital. Digital gets dropped as a word. I think data will. I think it'll be much more accessible. So low code, no code, for people being able to think about what they need to do to perform in their jobs. I think there will be more collaboration. Companies, as they increase their data maturity, will stop being so scared about collaborating or opening up their data, and will share it more either for health or societal benefits or for commercial, any of that. But they will recognize that doing good is good for business, and I think the maturity of data for good and good business will evolve so that actually it does make more sense, and the role of data in building a sustainable business, feeding into ESG, HR, data, I think will all mash together.
What an interesting future that will be.
Oh yeah.
And you'll be even more excited.
I think I'll just be squeaking. You won't want me on a podcast.
Yeah, no, of course you will. Brilliant. Thank you. One last question before I wrap up. This podcast is about talking to interesting and innovative people in kind of the data space. So if you had to nominate somebody for the next Identity Architects, who would that be?
You've got to speak to Pete Williams, who's the Chief Data Officer of Penguin Random House. I met him when he was head of data at M&S and I was at Boots, and we've been buddies since then. And he was the first person who showed me about data for good and hackathons. And at the time he was running sessions of using his data teams to do good work with charity. And he really inspired me. And I nicked that idea, and we've done that too. But he's brilliant.
Brilliant. All right, we'll see if we can set that up, and we'll let you know if we do, and you can listen in.
I will. Thanks,
Brilliant.
Stu.
Just remains for me to say thank you very much, Di. It's been lovely talking to you. Like I say, your passion and your energy and your insight is infectious. It's been a real joy hearing you talk and learning from you. So thank you again for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's been awesome.
Thanks very much. Thanks everybody for listening.
Thanks again to Di for joining us on Identity Architects. That was a fascinating discussion and a great way to kick off the new year of the podcast. All that leaves for me to do is to remind you to hit that subscribe button so you know when the next episode of Identity Architects lands. But until then, thanks for listening.